Hi, everybody. Welcome to our webinar on the fly unit testing, automate as you go. We're going to wait until everybody is online and then we'll dive right on in. So we'll get started at the top of the hour. See a lot of people trickling in right now. Again, we'll get started at the top of the hour. In the meantime, if you're feeling a little chatty this morning, you want to say hello, go ahead, pop into the chat, call out where you're from this morning. I'm over in Monrovia, California. That's where Parasoft is headquartered. So we're right next to Pasadena, if anyone's familiar with that area. It's looking to be a beautiful, sunshiny, and very warm day. So exactly what you expect from California. All right. Well, we are at top of the hour and we do have a lot of material to go over today. So I think that we can go ahead and get started. So first off, again, good morning or afternoon, everyone, depending on where you're situated. Thank you for joining our webinar today on the fly Java unit testing, automate as you code. My name is Jamie Motherall, and I'm the Parasoft product marketing manager and one of our functional testing specialists for our enterprise solutions here on Parasoft. And on the line with us today, we have my colleague, Brian McLaughlin. Brian, you want to say hi?
Yeah, hi everybody. So in case you don't know who I am, I wear a couple of hats at Parasoft. My primary one being I'm a senior software engineer over here and Scrum Master for the team and things like that. And I work on Parasoft J-Test for the most part, but a number of other things as well. And the fun things that I get to do, of course, is things like webinars, blogs, and stuff like that. So yeah, that's who I am and what I do here.
Yeah, but we keep you busy, that's for sure.
Yeah,
But we
yeah, that's
have a
true.
we have a great session planned for everyone today. We're going to be discussing how Java development teams can increase their productivity and reduce build and regression failures by shifting left the validation of code changes. And we'll also touch on how developers can accelerate unit testing by targeting modified or uncovered lines of code. Now, before we dive in, just some quick housekeeping. If your view of the slides or the demo appears a little bit blurry, please be sure to adjust the video resolution in the GoToWebinar window in your browser. Also, if you're not in full screen mode, I highly recommend that you maximize the presentation to full screen, especially for the demo. That'll give you a much clearer view. Now, if you do have any questions, if you have any issues with the GoToWebinar controls, please go ahead and pop a comment into the Q&A area. One of our colleagues on the line will reach on out to you and try to troubleshoot with you if it is an issue with GoToWebinar. Of course, if you have any questions, pop them in there. We'll try to answer them either during the presentation or we've allocated some time after for questions as well. So again, let's break down. We've got a lot to do today, a lot planned in this presentation and discussion. We're going to start with a discussion around some common testing challenges that development teams experience with active projects. And we'll go over some common root causes for those challenges. Then we do have a quick poll, so don't worry, it's just one quick question, but we'll do a quick little poll and then we'll start digging into the solutions. I know you also want us to talk a little bit about how we can solve these problems. So we'll take a look at test impact analysis, what it is, how it helps us to address those root causes, and how it helps to shift left the validation of code changes. From there, Brian's going to go into a demo for us on how to use test impact analysis in your IDE so that as you're making changes to the code base, you're able to easily and very quickly validate them all with an automated autonomous process. And then we'll wrap it up and take some questions. Again, we'll try to address questions as they come in if it makes sense to do so during the presentation, but we've allocated some time at the end. So let's kick off our discussion first around some common challenges in active development projects and their root causes. When we think about Java development productivity, we need to consider the common problems or obstacles that occur that can have a negative impact on the efficiency and the productivity of testing and code development. So, for instance, when developers experience things like build and regression failures, or there's a large amount of defects that are being found in the late stages by the QA team, or maybe the development team is spending a significant amount of their time on debugging or updating new test cases. All of these overall has a big impact on developer productivity because the amount of time that a developer has to focus on new feature code is compressed. So if build, regression failures, late stage defects are essentially the symptoms of what we're looking to cure, Brian, what is the root cause of all of this?
Well, I would say often, and not always, but often, one of the biggest root causes is that developers are either not doing enough testing or the tests that they're running are incomplete. So, and there's reasons for that that I'll go into, but what happens is that real issues in that modified code get missed when they commit it. And to be clear, I'm not saying that developers aren't testing their code at all, but there's gaps in that testing coverage.
Okay. So with these gaps, I mean, I mean, why aren't developers just running all of their necessary tests pre-commit? Is there a reason? Maybe you can break that down a little bit for us.
Yeah, so and that's a really good question. What we've heard from customers a lot is that as their projects grow
Mm-hmm.
and your collection of tests grow, assuming that you're writing new tests as you're writing new code,
Mm-hmm.
it starts to take longer and longer to run those tests, right? And especially for complex applications where you have lots of like interconnected components, it can be difficult to know which tests need to be rerun based on your changes, right?
Mm,
So it's not practical most of the time to run, for example, an hour's worth of tests for each change that you make while you're editing code, right? And so what often happens is that developers will wait until maybe the very end of a task that they're working on to run like a full suite of tests so
mm-hmm.
that they're still spending that time, but it's spent at the very end. And then if you have to rerun them over and over again in order to fix them, then that takes even more
Yeah,
time.
compounds the issue.
So yeah, so sometimes what we do is we'll try and run just maybe a few tests that we know about, which we think are going to be directly related or directly affected by our changes, but then
Mm-hmm.
some important ones get missed too, right? And then there's the case where sometimes we're in a hurry or we forget, and then we just let the nightly jobs or the CI/CD jobs run those tests, and then we go back and fix them later. The problem is that this creates a vicious cycle,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where we're spending more and more time running and maintaining our tests and less time writing code. So there's, less time that we get to spend on new tasks and new features, which means that there's less remaining time for testing those new features, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because of time constraints. And so overall, less testing is just being done by developers, which compounds because then you have to spend more time maintaining tests, and it just continues the cycle.
Yeah. It definitely seems like a vicious cycle, almost like a can of worms in a way, because I mean, if the developers already don't have enough time to execute and maintain their existing tests, then how are developers even juggling, for instance, creating new tests for their new feature code when they don't have enough time to maintain their existing test suites, let alone execute their entire test suite locally?
So what ends up happening a lot of the time is that validating the new functionality
Hmm.
often ends up depending heavily on the QA process, right?
Mm,
Unfortunately, that's even more time expensive, especially when they start finding issues, right? And they have to spend time reproducing it, documenting it, all that kind of stuff. Um, and that's also how we end up with things like, build failures, regressions, lots of failing tests in our automated jobs. And, the real risk there is ending up with delayed release cycles, right?
yeah. And all of this just, I mean, leads to increasing project costs overall, because as you're finding those defects in the later stages, as they're reported to development, development has to stop any of their new code development. They have to now start to kind of play detective, diagnose exactly what that issue is, and remediate. So all of that just compounds things further and further. So
Yeah.
we're going to dive into a quick poll. So again, just one quick question. Let me launch this right now. You should see it pop up. Are you seeing it on your side, Brian?
I do, yeah.
Okay, so one quick question for you. When do you validate your code changes? So do you validate them currently immediately after you save a change? Are you validating them before you commit the code to source control? Are you validating after you've made some local commits, but before you're pushing to remote? Is it after the code is committed to a branch that you're validating it, or maybe is it that you wait actually to validate changes just during the regression? So we're seeing a lot of responses come in. We'll give it another minute or two here, and then I'll share the results with everybody. And we'll just have a quick discussion on it before we dive into talking about the solution. Mhm.
Now, does this poll allow you to select multiple? Because
No,
it looks
this
like,
one. Mhm.
yeah, it looks like we can only select one, unfortunately. I imagine that some users and some developers actually do it at multiple stages.
Mhm. Yeah, it looks like we're getting quite a few that are leaving it toward the later stages, but quite a few that are also trying to do it early. So very
Yeah.
nice. Well, for
So
sake
yeah.
of time,
Sorry, go ahead.
let's close and let's share the results. We've got about 50% of everybody having responded. So you should be seeing the results now.
Yeah.
All right.
So yeah, so a lot of people are making an effort to validate their code changes early,
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes right before they commit their code to source control. Looks like that's the biggest one.
Yep.
Yeah,
That's
and
good to
and
see.
occasionally for some people that's after they push their code that validation ends up happening. So that's very
Mm-hmm.
interesting.
All right. Well, let's talk about how we can make this process a little bit easier. So let me go back to our slide deck here. And let's start talking a little bit about the solution. But thank you everybody for participating in the poll. Some very interesting data there, so we appreciate it. So Brian, what do we do about these challenges? How can we start to fix them or make it a lot easier for people to validate their code earlier?
Yeah, so in short, I would say that we need to find realistic ways to shift left our testing, right? Which
Mm-hmm.
most of us know that it's something that we want to do, but we need to enable our developers to find and fix those issues earlier, right? So that means that we need to focus or address the real problem here, which is the amount of time that it takes to run and maintain those tests.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, optimally, we want to be able to validate our changes directly in the IDE, right, before committing code, which that was the first poll option.
Mm-hmm.
Or, maybe before performing code review, depending on your workflow. But we need to find a way to do that efficiently, right? So if we've already decided that running every single test is impractical for every code change, what we need is a test impact analysis tool that can help us identify and run the true subset of tests which need to be rerun based on our changes. But we also need an intelligent unit test creation and maintenance tool so that we can identify and auto-generate tests where we have uncovered modified code. And
Mm-hmm.
that'll help us update tests also as our code changes, right? So all of these pieces are going to be saving us time in various places. Today, I'm going to be showing Parasoft JTest, which has both of those things. It has test impact analysis. It also has an AI enhanced unit test creation tool and test maintenance tools. So we'll be looking at all those.
All right. So let's talk about test impact analysis for a minute. What is it? What does it do? Why is it such a time saver for us? And I've worked with Parasoft for about 7 years now. Only in the last year I've shifted over to this role. Previously, I was working directly with our customers, and worked with a lot of customers on putting out case studies and things like that. And one thing that I consistently noticed was with the case study side of things, where we're talking about the impact, customers would bring up test impact analysis, reporting about a 90% acceleration in test cycle times, which is really impactful. So, Brian, maybe you can break it down a little bit more detail for us so it's just really clear exactly what test impact analysis does.
Sure. So the purpose of test impact analysis is to optimize your testing efforts, right? By automatically detecting test cases that are affected by modified code. So that's going to allow you to identify and rerun only the tests that are affected by code changes. Now, test impact analysis does this by building a mapping between the tests and the source code that they cover. So coverage data is going to be collected by running tests generally, either directly in your IDE or in a nightly job or a CI/CD job. And if you have multiple different kinds of test runs, for instance, maybe some integration tests, some JUnits, some UI tests, whatever they are, then the coverage data is going to be combined to build a complete mapping. And then test impact analysis is then going to look at your code changes based on source control data, and then it builds the final list of impacted tests by combining those two pieces of data. So since that final list is much smaller than the full suite, running just those tests is going to be a lot faster, right? But the important thing is it still fully validates the modifications to your application code.
Mm-hmm. And just a quick note before we move on from here. So Parasoft offers test impact analysis for CI processes for unit testing as well as functional testing, even in microservices architectures. So today we're focusing on the unit testing side. We're going to go into a demo here shortly on the IDE workflow for validating code changes. But if anyone wants to understand a little bit more how we implement test impact analysis for functional testing, please go ahead, drop a note into the Q&A section, and we'll make sure to get you over some information on it. So let's talk a little bit about this IDE workflow before we dive into the technical demo. You want to take it away again, Brian?
Sure. So the way that this works, the idea of this workflow is, as a developer, I mean, step one is I'm making changes to my code, right? So as I'm making changes to my code and I'm saving those changes to the application code, test impact analysis is going to automatically notice those changes. It's going to identify the impacted tests in real time. And that's going to give us visibility into the set of impacted tests. But then it's going to automatically run those tests in the background as you're making other changes, as you're doing other edits. So it's going to show you things like pass-fail information, the status of each test. So that's going to be added to the test impact analysis view. And then that means we can always see if any tests are failing based on the current state of my current changes, right? Now with that information, developers can then either update the application code, right, to fix real issues that the tests found, or they can update the tests themselves so that they pass. And that cycle is going to continue as test impact analysis detects fixes or updates to the impacted test list. Statuses are going to continue to be updated. So once all the tests are green and your code changes are done, then you can be a lot more confident that the existing tests that you have are going to pass, right, before you're committing changes. But also the fact that it's running in the background means that you're sort of like doing things in parallel, right? You're not waiting until the end to run the test and then add that time on the end. It's all happening as you're coding.
Yeah, I mean, literally, the developer here is just focused on their new code development, and every time they're hitting the save button, this is just happening in the background. So when we think about again, developer productivity, efficiencies. This autonomous process is really powerful, because every time we're disturbing a developer where they have to drop what they're working on as far as new code development and go and look at, what is the impact of the test case, what test do I need to run to validate these changes? I mean, that's time being taken away. So that's in the end impacting overall productivity. So this is really powerful. And I think at this point, we want to see this in action, right? So
Yeah.
Brian's going to go back in. He's going to take it away. He's going to make a quick code change. Then we're going to see impacted test cases in the test impact analysis view in the IDE. And then we're going to fix a failure. So give me just a minute. I'm going to switch it on over to Brian so that he can be the presenter, and you should be good to go.
All right, let me click the button here to share my screen. Okay, you should be seeing Eclipse now. So let's take a look at test impact.
Should we take our webcams off just for this, so it's nice and big on their screen?
I can do that. Yeah, let me turn.
Okay.
We'll turn
those off for now, and we'll come back later.
Okay. Yeah, it saves a little bit on bandwidth too. Okay, so so here we have Eclipse. We have Parasoft JTest installed. I'm looking at an example project. This is a little bit older project, and what I'm basically doing with this project is I'm kind of going through and modernizing it. So I'm going to make some code edits here, and I'm going to show what the impacted unit tests view does. First things first, remember I said before that test impact analysis needs coverage data. So you can see that I already have some coverage data loaded into my coverage view. I could get this by running all the tests, but what I've done here is I've actually imported that data from DTP. So DTP is our server which is going to collect and combine all the coverage data. Remember I said you can merge coverage data from multiple runs. So that's our tool for doing that. So I've imported all the coverage data. And you can see in my IDE, I also have green and red markers for code that's covered and that's not. So let's go in and make a change. One of the things that I might do here, I noticed that this is using this old iterator paradigm. I kind of don't like iterators whenever I see them. So I'm going to refactor this and use an enhanced for loop instead. So let's just make some little changes here. Oops, what did I do? Did I do this wrong? Oh, no, I didn't. I need to turn it into a for loop. Okay, so I've made some local changes. And you can see I've made the changes in an area where there's tests that cover this. So I expect to see some impacted tests. So let's go over to the view. Now it's not showing anything yet because I haven't saved the editor. I want to show you what happens as I'm saving things. So let's click that save button, and you'll notice that JTest noticed that there are several tests that are impacted, and it actually ran those impacted tests in the background without really needing to do anything other than save them. So they ran, and they're both marked as green, so they both actually ran and passed, which I would expect because I'm not making a behavior change, right? I'm just making a code style change. So that is really nice because that, like I said, is happening in the background as I'm making my edits, and so I get this real-time view. Now, if I do go in and I break some things, right? Let's say that I change some application behavior, and I save that, you'll notice that it's running tests again in the background, and I would now expect them to fail. Yep, which they do. So now, because these are running in a background process, they're not actually running in the normal IDE process. When they fail, it's important that I get some details. So obviously, I can mouse over, I can see what the failure is. I also have some other details here. So as I click around, you'll notice that there's details. I've got stack traces if I need them. And if I need even more debugging information, I can explicitly run this with the unit test assistant. So that's going to run that in the IDE. And so I'm going to get all of my built-in IDE tools. So I'll see all my complex stack traces here. But because it's running with the unit test assistant, that's also going to enable the test maintenance tools that we have built into JTest. So once this loads, you can see that in the unit test assistant view, I have a flow tree that shows me what actually happened. I can click around, I can look at variables, which shows me inputs and outputs and what parameters were passed in various methods. And I also get recommendations. So for instance, if I'm looking at this test and I say, okay, this behavior change is intentional, my test needs to be updated, I can now come in here and just click update assertion, and that's going to update my test automatically. And you'll notice that just by doing that, it also is now rerunning the test. So it's going to give me updated information about what's passing and what's failing. As a side note, there's also another thing that it does, which is that as it's running tests in the background, it's actually updating my coverage data. So if I am making changes to the test, if I'm making changes to the application code, where I'm adding or removing things, it's going to update the coverage markers and the coverage data as well. So I've got real-time feedback with both coverage and with impacted tests. And of course, I actually don't want to break my application code, so let's uncomment that and save it. And once again, it's running and everything should pass. So that's the basics of seeing and running and updating current tests. The next thing that we're going to need to look at is, what do we do about code that isn't covered by a current test? And before we do that, I think we want to explain how that process is going to work. So I'm going to, Jamie, I'm going to make you the presenter again so that we can talk about the test creation process for uncovered code.
Perfect. So we'll chat on this for a moment and then we'll dive back into the demo. So let's see here. So now that we've seen the IDE workflow test impact analysis in action, Brian, let's talk about kind of how you're going to be able to easily create new test cases specifically for uncovered lines of modified code. So do you want to walk us through this?
Yeah, so the idea here is that we want to ensure that new code or any code which isn't already covered by any existing tests is going to be validated with new tests, right? And remember, the idea here is we're trying to save ourselves time and make it easy to build new tests so that developers are actually doing it as part of their existing workflow. So we want to focus on building tests for what's changed, right? Not necessarily the entire code base. You can do that another time. So the way that this works is Parasoft JTest, as you said, provides an AI-powered automated test generation workflow that can be driven by those same source code changes that drives test impact analysis. So that process is going to construct and configure new tests based on your changes, right? From there, test impact analysis is going to see those newly generated tests. It's going to add them to that list of impacted tests, right? So it's going to continue to run them automatically and update statuses and coverage data and all of that. And then in the same way that I was able to debug and then update an existing test, I can also do any additional configuration for those new tests with recommendations for things like augmenting, the test case to expand coverage, or add or update assertions, or better isolate the code under test, right? Whatever needs to happen. So that'll happen after the test generation process as well. So overall, that's going to help you reach or maintain code coverage goals, code quality goals. So if you're trying to reach a specific code coverage goal by adding more tests as you go, right? So that'll help with that. Obviously, it's also going to help you ensure that all of your modified functionality is being thoroughly tested, right, before it reaches source control.
Now, I know we're going to go into a demo next, but I do see a question. We've got a couple questions already, but this one I think is a good time to answer it. So they're asking if this AI is on-prem or if it's integrated to like a LLM. So to answer that, Everything that Brian's going to show you right now, test impact analysis, Parasoft's AI, test generation for unit testing for Java, all of that is our proprietary AI. So it is all on-prem. It doesn't go back and communicate with Parasoft. So essentially you can run this even if your company has, for instance, barred things like OpenAI. Now we do have optional integrations for OpenAI or Azure OpenAI for test generation, but it's but again, that's a different topic. I highly recommend, watching another webinar of ours if you'd like to do a deep dive on that or requesting a demo with us. So I'll turn this on back over to you and let's dive into that technical presentation. You are the presenter. And I'm going to turn off my webcam again.
All right, let me click a button here. Yeah, share mine and then turn off my webcam again, just in case. Okay, so hopefully you'll see Eclipse again. So along the same lines as before, where I'm going through my application and just updating some code that looks wrong. So here's an example of a method which is just completely untouched by any existing tests, right? So if I go in here and I make a change, for instance, this looks a little bit odd to me. If I'm adding something to a map, I probably don't need to actually declare it as an integer object. Let's simplify this and let's make some changes. So just removing that, once again, shouldn't change the behavior, right? But you'll notice that as I save that, no additional tests showed up, right? Because there's no tests that are impacting, or there's no tests that are covering this bit of code. And I can see that with my markers here. So I don't really know if I actually broke anything, do I? So this is a really good example of why we need to add tests as we go for any modified code. And realistically, what's going to happen, I'm making these small changes in 1 or 2 files, but really what it's going to happen is, in a real scenario, I'm going to be making lots of changes in lots of places, right? So there could be a fair bit of uncovered code in here that I've modified that I'm not aware of. So let's generate tests for stuff that's been modified, and let's do that in a systematic way. So I'm going to go up at the project level, and I'm actually going to go here, and I'm going to create a test suite. So this is a JTest action that I can use, and this is going to look at my project and figure out what's in it. So I'm going to maximize my code coverage. I want to just use some defaults here. An important piece of the configuration, though, you'll notice I could generate tests for everything in the whole project, but remember, we're trying to save time. We don't really want to do that. So what I'm going to do instead is generate tests only for changes. I'm going to talk about these options and what they mean in a few minutes, but for now, this is going to generate tests only for local changes. That's going to be the scope. So let's go ahead and do that. And what JTest is doing right now is it is obviously it's looking for code changes, right? It's identifying what changed in my application. And then it's going to perform some AI-based analysis of the code changes, but the methods in particular. And it's going to try and generate some tests for me that are going to cover the uncovered code. So it's figuring out what the code paths are. It's generating tests for these code paths. It's also running them in the background to make sure that they run properly. It's going to look at coverage so that if there's duplicate tests, it can clear out the duplicates. And it's going to generate assertions for me. So that process is done, and it found a couple of places where it could create some tests. So I can go ahead and click OK. This is just a summary of what it did. And you'll notice that there's a new test that's been added to my list here. And there's even a little icon, I don't know if you can see it, but it shows that that is actually a new test. And because it ran and it passed already, you can see that the coverage markers updated. So I can see that my modified code is already covered by my changes. So that was actually pretty easy and largely painless. It also did generate this other test over here. So sometimes there is an extra step there where I need to go in and do some additional debugging, figure out if there's a missing mock or whatever it is. And as before, I can run that with UTA and do some debugging and all that kind of stuff. I don't think we have a lot of time to show that right now, so I'm going to move on from that, but that's how that works.
Hey, Brian,
So,
before we move on, we've got two
yeah.
questions that I think we can quickly answer here. So the first one is, do we also support IntelliJ? Which, yes, that we're seeing it currently in Eclipse, but yes, we do and support IntelliJ. And then the other one is asking if you could just quickly explain the color coding for the different coverage markers.
Oh yeah, the color coding is very simple. It's literally just red and green. Green means that it's covered, red means that it's not. It's really that simple. You can also get some more detailed coverage information if you want to drill down. You can get percentages. So the coverage is interactive with the editor as well, in case you're kind of curious about that. But yeah, that's really it. It's just green is covered and red isn't.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to next talk just a little bit about the options. Remember I said that I was going to discuss the options in the bulk dialog in a minute. I want to come back to that and talk about that a little bit because I think it's important to remember, here in my demo, I'm showing what happens if I make changes locally, right? And I'm running tests that based on local changes, and I'm creating tests based on local changes, but that's not everybody's workflow. So for instance, I think probably everybody's familiar with, if you're familiar with Git, you're probably familiar with this Git flow diagram, right? Some teams use a variety of different branches. Some teams do things where they'll use a code review process where you create temporary branches, or maybe you have feature branches for user story. So there's lots of different ways to use Git. And sometimes what we actually need to do is we need to define the scope of what we consider to be an impacted code in our code base. So for example, let's say, and right now I'm on a branch. So let's say that I'm on a feature branch right now. And let's say that, I'm here and this is my feature branch, and I actually have reached the end of my sprint, or I've reached the end of a user story implementation, and now I want to go back and actually fill in the gaps of my modified code coverage, right? Maybe my modified code coverage is a bit low. So what I really need to do is I need to create tests or look at impacted tests for everything in that branch. So I can do that with those configuration options. And we saw that in the create test suite action, but I can also do this over here for my impacted unit tests. So if I click configure, you'll notice that the same options are available here that we saw a moment ago. These are going to affect this view. So if I'm on this feature branch, what I'm probably going to want to do is I'm going to want to look at, like I said, all of the commits in this range. And that means saying, I want to look at everything on the current branch since it diverged from master. So this might be, everything on my branch since it diverged from here. So this might be, this may have advanced, this is advanced, but I want to look at all of these. So that's what that's going to do. And I know that those options are a little bit technical. They are well documented. If there's ever a question about what to use, we have other examples as well. But by setting that up, you can see that the scope of all of the tests that are impacted has now changed. And it's also running all of those impacted tests, once again, in background, and it's updating all my statuses. So now I can see everything on the branch, and I can see all these things that are tested. I can also go back and see coverage markers as before, because they've been updated now that all these tests have run. And if I want to increase my code coverage, I can go back and do the same thing where I can create tests for that same scope. Okay, so I think that's everything that I wanted to show on the demo. I think I'm going to hand it back to you then, Jamie, and let's
Yep.
continue.
Perfect. We'll do a quick wrap up here and then dive into some additional questions. So, Brian, thanks again for that great demo. It was good to see it all in action and walking us through some of the different workflows as well for test impact analysis. So, for a quick sum up, what we saw today is shifting left the validation of code changes results in fewer late stage defects, which in turn means less costly remediation, less disruption to developers. It reduces build and regression failures due to failing tests. Builds are more stable. Developers are getting feedback faster with this process. And as impacted test cases have already been run prior to regression testing, there's a lot less failures occurring, which would require rework across the development team. And overall, it all leads to just increased development, increased efficiency for developers because they can focus on new feature code development. They can increase their testing thoroughness, all while autonomously validating code changes in the IDE background. So before we wrap up and get to the Q&A, I did want to leave you with just a little bit more information in case you'd like to take a deeper dive into JTest and the impact it can have on your Java testing practices. So this is a case study. You can access it through that little QR code. We'll also be emailing it over to everybody. Oops, let me go on back. We'll also be emailing it over to everybody so you can wait to get access that way. But this is about a financial firm and them using JTest. They were using JTest, or still are using JTest, I should say, for unit test generation. They've been using test impact analysis as a part of their CI/CD workflow. Now they're starting to use it in the IDE. These numbers achieved 85% code coverage in a few weeks. They went from actually about 20% code coverage to 85 using our tool, so very quickly. And then on the test cycle time, the regression test execution times have accelerated by 90%. So a 90% reduction in the time it takes to execute their regression test because they're just focusing on validating what has been changed. So I highly recommend reading through that case study if you have a chance. And then as far as some additional information, so we do offer technical demos where if you want to do a deep dive, you go, hey, this was really interesting. I'd like to learn a little bit more about the AI test generation. I want my team, for instance, to see the test impact analysis IDE workflow. I recommend reaching on out to us to request a technical demo. Our team will sit down with you. We'll have a quick chat around what your goals are, what are those testing challenges you've encountered, and then we'll customize the presentation specifically to your project's needs. If you're the type of person that also says, you know what, I just want to get my hands on it. I want to try this for myself. Well, we do offer a 14-day free download. So you're welcome to go ahead, download it now, get started with it. Our team's also available to assist you if you do want a little bit of help getting started. So we're on standby and all really focused on your success. Another thing I want to point out is JTest also has capabilities on the static analysis side. So while today focused on test impact analysis, you saw a little bit of the unit testing side. If you'd like to see something a little bit more comprehensive that's also showing what our static analysis capabilities are, tomorrow we have our monthly demo for JTest. So I'll put the link for registering that into the chat for everybody so that you have access. So now at this point, let's dive into some questions. So we've got a few here. So there is one that someone put into the chat asking about more information for test impact analysis. If you want to just clarify in the question area as well, letting me know if you're talking about the functional side or the unit testing side, I can make sure that we get you over the right information. Then I see this one. Does test impact analysis only work on Parasoft generated test cases? Do you want to take that or you want me to take that, Brian?
Sure. The short version is no, it doesn't just work on Parasoft generated test cases. In fact, we have lots of customers that had a lot of tests before they brought JTest into the picture. And what it generates also does not require JTest to always be there. So you can generate the test cases. They go into source control. They're just normal JUnits. They don't depend on any of our libraries or anything like that.
Yeah, JTest tries not to vendor lock you in that regard. So again, you're generating just regular JUnits. If you have existing JUnits, you can just plug it into JTest, run test impact analysis on it, use the unit testing side to extend tests, for instance, drive additional coverage, things like that. On the functional testing side, I want to touch on that briefly too. So you don't need to be using Parasoft solutions, for instance, like our SOA test solution for API testing that has test impact analysis built into it, or our Selenic solution for Java-based Selenium testing that has test impact built into it. We have a solution called CTP and DTP, and using those, as long as your applications are written in Java or .NET, we can actually plug into any automated functional testing that you might be running. So if you're doing Catalan, if you're doing Ranorex tests, you can actually plug them into our system and run test impact analysis through the CI process on those types of test cases. And then I see sometimes I commit code and want to come back to it later. Oh, this is clarifying a little bit because we did talk about this a little bit. Can we run test impact analysis or impacted test creation based on Git history?
Yeah, so that was one of the last things that I did show. Like I said, the options there. I didn't go through every single option, but there's quite a lot of flexibility in the tool there that allows you to define the scope of what you want to do. So, in short, yes, you can do exactly that.
Mm-hmm. All right, one more question we've got here, and this is an easy one. So someone's asking about how they could enroll in the 14-day trial. So if you just want to either scan that QR code on your phone, you can do that. We'll also be emailing you this link. You can grab that link as well, or you can just go to the Parasoft JTest page. Just Google Parasoft JTest. It'll take you to our product page where you can get more information about JTest. But at the top of the screen, you'll see a try it now. You just fill out this little form saying, email, name, job title, and you can download it and get started. And again, our team is available to assist. If you did want to do something a little bit more formal, where you actually have like a full, on-prem POC, I recommend to do that demo request first and have one of our team reach out to you, and then you'll get assistance throughout the entire evaluation process. So it all depends on kind of how you want to do it. Our customer success teams, our professional service teams are just fantastic to work with. So I think you'll enjoy that. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. I think that's all the time we have for questions today. I really hope that this was a valuable presentation for you, looking at how we can help to shift left, code validation, how you can just make it a lot easier in the IDE process. So, you're not as disrupted as far as a developer, and you're getting that continuous feedback autonomously. So again, thank you everyone for your time. If you do have any additional follow-up questions, feel free to just reach on out to us. We're always happy to talk about testing. Brian, thank you so much for everything today too. I'll let you say a goodbye as well before we hang up.
All right, yeah, it's been really, really great showing the presentation today. I hope we all learned a few things, and I hope we're all excited to try out JTest.
Wonderful. All right, have a good one, everybody. Have a great rest of your week, and enjoy the summer, and happy testing. Bye-bye.